So a couple of items before I do get started on this particular topic. In fact, Abhijit and me were speaking a few weeks back, and we said that this is perhaps a topic that would be of interest to quite a few people because of the fact that pre-sales, sales engineering, bid management, proposal management, all of these are functions that are present there in pretty much every organization. But this is one function, right, where the KPIs and metrics are not as clear as, for example, a few other functions. Let's say, as an example, whether it's sales or whether it's delivery, right? But before I do get started and put up a few slides, a couple of points that I would like to put forward is one, that this particular session is well, with all due honesty, skewed towards the IT industry. We've had a few questions coming through LinkedIn and other forums, and we do understand that bid and proposal management is a much larger function in itself, which extends beyond IT, right? So we had people from, example, aerospace and telecom reach out to us, right? And not for the core IT function itself, but for their particular space. And bid management could be pretty much present in each and every industry, whether it's construction or energy, right? But we hope that with the kind of insights that we will be providing during this particular session, it would help not just for the bid management function for IT industries, but also for other industries as well, right? So that's point number one. Point number two is that we would really like to make it an interactive session in the sense that I just have a few slides that I've put up, not a lot of them. And what my intention is that after each few slides, just to take a pause, reach out for feedback. Obviously, this is this particular AirMeet platform is one in which one can either participate through chat or one can participate through speaking up by coming onto the stage. So I'll be coordinating with Rupesh on that particular point for logistics of how we can make it more interactive. But keep typing your questions in, and I will try and take them as we go along. I really don't want to keep questions towards the end. We'll see how it goes, because this is a significantly large topic. So just to think that we may be able to cram everything within 60 minutes and now effectively 52 minutes, it is not practical, right? So let's try and answer the questions or address the questions as we go along as well, right? So with that being said, I'll just try and share my screen. So just give me a second. All right. So as you might have seen while I was bringing up the screen itself, that I don't have too many slides, because I want the slides to be mainly as placeholders, and then look at ways in which we can interact as well. So what are the key takeaways? And this is what we had put up during the session introduction as well. So we would try and understand what are the success criteria and the measurement of success for these KPIs as well, because according to me, while we may be able to allocate KPIs themselves, how do we really measure them, right? That may be a challenge, because there are multiple different type of indicators. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes. Which may or may not be quantitative in nature, right? And if they're not quantitative, how do we really try and take it a step forward and put it forward as something that can be measured and then hopefully can be taken during the appraisal discussions as well, right? So we'll start with a famous quote, and I don't want to dwell into why KPIs are very important. I think we are beyond that particular point. I think all of us do understand the importance of KPIs, especially in a function like bid and proposal management. But the important part about this particular saying, which is you can't improve what you don't measure, is the fact that uh, you really have to assign KPIs, right, which are smart in nature, right? And I won't get into what smart KPIs are, but you need to ensure that those KPIs that are allocated are relevant and measurable, right? And obviously time bound as well. So uh, I just want to bring up a question of the Hawthorne effect itself, right? And what this basically says is the fact that this is a change in people's behavior, just knowing the fact that they are being observed, right? So just knowing the fact that KPIs have been allocated and the fact that the team or the individual is being measured on those particular KPIs itself uh, has proven itself to the fact that there is an improvement in the team performance itself beyond what was there when the KPIs were not allocated, right? And I think that's an important takeaway for us that instead of things being fluid, let them be there as KPIs which can be measured, and then accordingly performance can be judged as well. But at the same time, right, not everything that can be counted really counts. So there is a flip side to it as well. Let's say, as an example, and well, it's not any rocket science of what those KPIs really could be, right? But how do we know that each of the KPIs that can be allocated, should we be really measuring those? What are the focus areas? Because one brush really doesn't suit for all types of situations, right? There may be different teams within the organization. There may be people with different experience level within the organization. The organization itself may be of different stages of maturity. All these can really affect what are the KPIs that should be allocated. So while some of those KPIs, for example, the win rates or the capture rates, which are some of the more common ones, can really be allocated, but we need to see what the context of setting up those KPIs are. So hence the point that not everything that can be counted really counts comes forward in this particular point, right? And this slide really forms the basis on which KPIs can be measured. So there are around 11 kind of indicators out there. These are obviously, as I mentioned, not just applicable to the IT industry, but could be applicable to a larger industry as well, right? Or different industries as well. For example, what are the quantitative indicators, right? We always have this fascination around everything being quantitative in nature. So as I was mentioning earlier, the sales teams, right? They have pretty much KPIs which are quantifiable. For example, they have a sales target. Either that sales target is met or that is not met, right? And there are various measurement tools also available. So, for example, Salesforce.com, in which all the opportunities are entered into and is used for the entire engagement lifecycle management as a CRM, right? That can be particularly used as a measurement tool as well. So it's clear for them. For a delivery team, it might be, for example, the number of tickets raised, right? Or for a product development team, it could be the number of bugs or the number of defects in a particular release. But what about the uh, bid and proposal management team? So before we get into some specific KPIs that can be judged based upon that, let's look as to what are some of the indicators that can be the inputs towards that, right? So for example, quantitative indicators. So quantitative indicators are something that are pretty much one of the easier ones to judge. But these could be something, for example, the time available, right? And once again, we have to watch out for a few things, right? The KPIs could be, and I have a slide on this at a later point of time. The KPIs could be either on an individual basis, the KPIs could be on a team basis, or the KPIs could be on an organizational basis. as well, right? And once again, the KPIs could be, as I mentioned in the open question below, and the obvious answer is both, right? Should KPIs be based upon outcomes or processes? So those are the various uh, things that we should incorporate, right, before laying out the KPIs. So from a quantitative indicator perspective, right, we could have something like a time available. All right, so what is the time dedicated towards a particular bid that is going out there? Could be an indicator. Right now, this not only affects the individual, but it also affects the number of team. It also affects the team as well, because that in turn leads to what we call as the bid velocity as well. Right, the bid velocity is something like the number of bids churned out over a particular period of time, right? So quantitative indicators would be something like the time spent towards a particular bid. Qualitative indicators, right? Now this is an interesting one, right? And this brings us back to the question around how do we turn something that is qualitative in nature to something that can be measured, right? So a classic example of this would be something like a CSAT or an employee sat, right, of how something which is qualitative in nature, for example, the feedback based upon how a person interacts or how a person behaves, and how the entire process is monitored, how the entire process is measured, how to convert that into something which is quantitative in nature, right? So that's something like a CSAT. A leading indicator, right, could be and this is usually the +1 KPI that many organizations have. How do we contribute towards something like writing a white paper or a point of view? Obviously, if it is in the product management or the product development team, it would be something like the number of patents filed, etc. But from a bid and proposal management perspective, it could also be, for example, how have we laid out the process? Have we captured, for example, case studies? Have we captured use cases? Have we contributed towards any white paper development? Have we provided a point of view of our own? Right. So those are some of the leading indicators. A lagging indicator could be something like the number of contacts that we have, right? Because that's post facto, we'll be really measuring it. Input indicators would be something like the available resources that we have in hand, right? And those available resources may not necessarily be people, but they also could be something that may also be an input from the leading indicators. As an example, do we have the right processes in place? Do we have case studies? Do we have references in place? Right. Those would be the indicators around input indicators. Right. Process indicators are something like for example the turnaround time for a particular process. These are a little bit of a challenge for the bid and proposal management function, but at the same point of time, a very good indicator of how bids, and especially large bids in nature, are managed, which take more than 4 to 6 weeks for the bid cycle itself, right? The output indicators are obviously an outcome of the exercises that we've carried out, which could be, for example, what are the revenues, what are the profits, or what are the number of new customers that have been acquired. Practical indicators are something that exist in the ecosystem itself. For example, the company environment. And I mentioned that this is a point of discussion because large enterprises, as an example, may have more mature processes. They may have the training infrastructure available, right? And at the same point of time, they may have the right resources available as well in terms of the people. So how does that really affect the win rates as well? Because when we do draw out the KPIs, would it be prudent enough to see that the KPIs which are there for a bid and proposal management team in a large mature organization would be the same as that in a startup, right? Next, I'll come down to perhaps some directional indicators. What is the competition? What is the competition doing? What has the history of the competition being, etc. Right. Actionable indicators are change in the environment. For example, if there is some change in legislation, how does that affect this particular industry, this particular organization, and how agile is that particular organization in taking up action which addresses those changes in the environment. Last but not the least, on the indicators itself is the financial indicators, which is kind of an obvious ones, but some organizations also focus on some other financial indicators apart from revenue, which is things like the operating margin or even the cost to bid, right? So I'll be looking forward to toggling back to the chat window, having a look of the questions that are coming up, and also trying to understand that should KPIs be based upon outcomes or processes, right? My take is that obviously the answer is both of them, but the ones around processes are a little difficult to measure, and it may be leading to more qualitative in nature rather than quantitative in nature, while the outcome based, right, for example, revenues, clients, time, operating margin, all of these are a little easier in nature to measure and then quantify. Sorry, quantify and then measure, right? I hope everybody can see my screen now, right? And so yeah, so coming back to the question around what are the some examples of KPIs, I try to classify them as individual, team, and company. While there may be some fluidity between the individual and the team, and between the team and the company KPIs, but I think these are more directional and indicative in nature, that we can assign some of these KPIs to particular team members and bid and proposal management function as a whole. Right. So, for example, the win rates. Right. So it's very important, it's a very important KPI that is measured for win rates itself. But there is devil in the detail itself, as they say. So, as an example, a higher win rate with a lower number of bids, right? For what we were speaking about a couple of minutes back around the risk and reward and the directional indicators as well. We digressed into that. But if a company is just bidding on a small number of bids and has a higher number of a higher win rate itself, right? How would that be judged against an organization with the same resources, or perhaps even the same organization, different teams, bidding for a larger number of bids and having a lower win ratio? Right. So once again, a little bit subjective in nature, and that is perhaps what brings us to something called a capture rate as well. Right, and a capture rate is very important in the sense that it judges it measures, I'm sorry, by the number of or the value, dollar value of the bids that have been bid out versus the win, or the total dollar amount against it. Right. So with the ideal way to look at it is to judge by the higher win rate with a higher capture rate. Right. Or there could be two other combinations. A higher win rate with a lower capture rate will really indicate that even though that the bids, the win ratio is higher, the win rate is higher, but the total sum or the average sum per bid that is being bid out is much lower. So the organization may be just bidding out smaller bids, but they may be having a higher win rate. And it could be the other way around as well, lower win rate with a higher capture rate, where the dollar value of the bids that is being bid out is much larger because the organization is looking into bidding for larger bids itself. Right. The second point on the individual basis, and this could be also on the team front, is the quality of the response itself. Right now, the quality of the response is difficult to judge truly, but the fact is that we should be perhaps looking at many organizations provide a feedback of what the scoring for your particular tender is, right? And ideally speaking, this scoring should be for multiple bids over a period of time be recognized as a directional indicator as well, right? And that will help you to identify the areas that you need to improve or retain the position, right? So, and the measure would be increase average scores in the team structure by X percentage, right? So, the quality of response is an important KPI that can be measured. One of the important things is it also comes back as a feedback from the client that did you bid in time, and if an organization moves to the next steps as well, then there are scoring parameters that are also provided, right? I do understand that I set some points for point number 2 and point number 3 together, but that's the nature of the bids itself, that you would have to understand that how do you measure the responses that have been provided for a particular bid, right? Then is the bid strategy itself. Okay, and once again, bid strategy may be a team KPI, or for under some circumstances, it could also be a company KPI as well. Right? We were talking about risk reward as well. I won't delve into that once again, but it could be around the market segment that we are addressing. And it also, for example, ties back into some of the company strategy as well. All right. So, for example, the company strategy may be that for this particular financial year, we will have a focus upon a higher operating margin for our organizations, right? So, if the company is focusing upon higher operating margin for the organization, that means the price for a particular bid will really go up, and that would really affect the win rate as well, right? So you can see how different KPIs tie together: the win rate, the bid strategy, the price, and also perhaps something like the company goals as well, right? The second one on the team front is the efficiency, right? Because efficiency is a factor of two things. One is the time, and the other one is resources, right? And both, as we know, time and resources are limited factors, right? So what we may spend our efforts in is how do we increase the efficiency of the team itself, and the targets can be based upon, for example, how do you make it easier for the team to bid, right? So is there a SharePoint or any other tool that is being made available? Are all the repositories up to date, etc.? Right. So those are a couple of things on the efficiency perspective. Next is on the team front is the velocity, right? And as I've mentioned, the velocity could be with respect to the bid, or it could be with respect to the revenue itself, right? From the bid perspective, the velocity would be, as an example, the number of bids submitted upon the number of days it has taken, or the number of working days it has taken for the bids to be submitted, right? And from the revenue perspective, it could be the revenue of the submittals, right, by the working days itself. So this goes back to our discussion on win rate versus capture rate. This is another perspective of looking at how a team productivity is really measured, right? It could be measured by the bid velocity and also by the revenue velocity, right? And we'll have to look at interdependencies, that how does a higher bid velocity affect the revenue velocity, if at all, and the win rates, right? I think I already dwelled a little bit on the company perspective itself, right? When I said that what is the company strategy? The strategies could obviously change with respect to time as well. For example, if it's a new market segment that the organization is entering, then there may be okay, right? Some organizations may be okay with a lower win rate, but they would want to get across their RFP submissions or bid submissions to a larger number of organizations to gain traction within the market itself, right? And so those are the things which may affect the overall company strategy and the company goals. So the elephant in the room, all right. So the elephant in the room really is around deal qualification, right? Because if we go back to these KPIs itself, as you may really see that the win rates, the quality of the response, the strategy, the velocity, right? All of these are dependent upon the deal qualification itself, right? Do we go in for a higher number of deals to be bid out and be aware that it may lead us to a smaller number of win rate, or do we qualify it and then look at the downside of it, that if we have a lower win rate, we may end up losing revenue, right? So the question always remains that who is responsible for the deal qualification itself? Is it a sales responsibility? Is it pre-sales responsibility? Or is it some other team within the organization, for example, let's say delivery, right? So ideally, the answer is all of the above, right? But from an ownership perspective, I think in many organizations, the bid and proposal or the pre-sales team really takes up the deal qualification, because they are ideally positioned in order to really talk to the sales teams and understand the customer point of view. From a customer perspective, it may be things like do we have uh, does the customer have revenues allocated to it, right? Or does, for example, does the customer, I'm sorry, have budgets for it? Do we know someone who can influence the deal on our behalf, right? So the salesperson could fill it out, provide some weighted average to it, and then from a delivery perspective, does our company focus upon this product or this service that is being asked for? Is there adequate time for us to respond back to this particular bid? Do we have the right kind of resources in order to fulfill the customer requirements, etc.? Right, that ideally comes up as a weighted score, and then the qualification really happens. But many a time, what really happens is an overarching approval, right? When the salesperson comes in and says that I know somebody who sits on the board of that particular organization, and I'm sure I can influence the deal, right? And that really turns some of the other weighted averages around. So a bid qualification, or the deal qualification, I think is something that we as bid and pre-sales proposal managers really go through on a daily basis. It's something that we have to confront. But the fact is that it's a topic in itself. Would be glad to take up almost a separate session for this particular one as well. KPIs, or measurement criteria rather, around deal qualification. But we should understand that this is a major one that affects multiple other points within the organization, right from the organization's revenue forecast itself, right? So it's a particularly big one. So I'll stop sharing once again for a couple of minutes, head back to the chat window, and let's see what we have in the chat window as well. All right. Okay, I quite a few, so I'll have to scroll up bid. Um All right. Ragit says, never have been subjected to KRIs in the proposal world despite being here for 10 years, considering the quality responses. How can we measure something as subjective as plain language, responsiveness, and win themes? All right. So, Ragit, those are a few different things that are out there, right? Something as plain language. What I mean, I think, would you be indicating the quality of the language itself? I hope, and I've seen the best practices out there, and I've been a part of these committees as well, which are the deal management committees, right, or the deal assurance committees within organizations, at least within larger organizations, who do an entire proposal review, both from a technical perspective and a commercial perspective. I think the table stakes for any good bid or proposal manager is to have the right plain language in there. Obviously, hopefully, there would be a reviewing manager as well. Responsiveness, I think. One shouldn't be measured on the responsiveness itself, because writing across an additional 10 emails wouldn't be really counted as responsiveness. I would rather say that how about sticking to the project plan that is drafted by either the bid manager or a project manager for a particular bid, sticking to that, providing inputs where called in for, would be more appropriate, right? Win themes is a good point, right? This is not just a particular individual who has to come up with win themes, and I don't know how win themes can really be a KPI in themselves, but a win theme is an important part of the entire bid management life cycle itself. Once again, the responsibility of a cross-functional team across sales, pre-sales, as well as technology. Uh, Jay says, for a bid manager, it makes sense to have a mix of smaller, medium, and large deal size to keep up the motivation. Point noted. Point noted, Jay. Because there's also something that we sometimes don't discuss as bid and proposal managers, is bid fatigue. Right. So, for example, I have been part of many deals which have gone on for 6+ months, and at that very point of time, you really don't want to get into another bid which you know is going to last for another 6+ months as well, right? And hence, you rightly mentioned, it is up to the manager, probably from a team management perspective, to provide different combinations of deal sizes to that particular bid manager. But at the same point of time, there are large bid specialists as well who really thrive in this environment. So to each his own as well. Jesse says, how would you measure or evaluate win rate from a bid manager perspective, right? So from a bid manager perspective, Jesse, the answer would be pretty simple, right? It would be a quantitative figure. The higher the win rate, the better it is, right? So then we wouldn't look into any other perspective. For example, the bid qualification, or the number of bids that have been responded to. It would simply be a percentage of the number of wins versus the number of bids that have been responded to, from purely from a bid management perspective. But as I mentioned, that these would certainly influence a larger amount of things, right up to what the expected revenues for the organization are, to the market positioning of the organization as well. But from plainly, it would be just a win percentage. But as we said, it really doesn't capture quite the essence of the work that has been carried out. Right. Jaya says win rate completely depends on bid probability, win rate assumption before bidding. Anything under 25% bid probability. Yes, different measures of measuring probability of wins, but yes, I think 25% is something where one really needs to call it out, right? Abhishek says win rate should be a KPI at team and bid strategy can be an individual level. Yes and no. I think that is a little subjective, especially around bid strategy. Abhishek, being at the individual level. Probably you may have thought that I was talking only about a particular bid, right? But this would also mean how do we bid for a particular segment of tenders that we are responding to. So it may not be at the individual level. Lavina says, how is win rate an individual KPI for a bid manager and not a KPI for a team of team or company? Fair enough point. I did mention that some of these KPIs that are indicated could move between individual as well as team. But as a bid manager, right, a bid manager, if you look at the job description itself, is responsible for the end-to-end management of a particular bid. And from a roles and responsibility perspective, it definitely is at least an individual KPI for which a bid manager needs to be measured upon. There are multiple dependencies. Once again, the same can be extrapolated. The same logic can be extrapolated, for example, to the delivery team. If we take, for example, the number of bugs that are coming up for code, right? So is it an individual's fault of the bugs coming up, or is it the fault of the entire team which is developing that code or that program or that software itself, right? So ultimately, as you would realize that we have to say that it has to be for the individual who is writing that particular piece of code and overall for the delivery team, right? So in the same way, you can equate it to the bid management area as well, right? It has to be on the individual basis as well. And yes, we never said no for the overall collective team, right? Because once again, this is one of those directional indicators as well. You keep on measuring for the entire team. Then you might be able to also find out, Lavina, that how a particular section of the team or an individual has a better win rate than an other individual. Is it a lack of training? Is it a lack of skill set? Is it a lack of resources? Is it a lack of giving the wrong bids to that particular person, right? So it's important to measure it at the individual level. Amy says, okay, Amy responded to Jesse. We consider any RFX response that goes to the next stage as a win for the bid team. Yes, fair enough, which is true. But next stage is also, I wouldn't call it subjective because it is a definitive next stage as well. But does the bid manager's responsibility end there? Or does it also move into the next stages as well until we have the deal win itself? I think that really depends upon the kind of bid or the RFX that is being responded to. Couple of comments upon that. But next stage, negotiation stage. Okay, there's quite a bit of discussion happening there. Jesse says, my question was more from how can you rate or evaluate a bid manager based on win rate? Win rate depends upon many factors beyond bid manager. Definitely, it depends upon many factors. I think I just discussed that whether it should be an individual or a team one, so won't dwell into that. But point accepted. But after all, there has to be a individual who carries the responsibility of the entire bid. In the same sense, it could be counted as a loss for the sales manager as well, right? Because the sales manager would have the client facing responsibility, and hence he or she would not be able to account for those revenues as well. So it's a loss from the sales perspective as well. We are not placing the blame on a particular individual or the credit at the same point of time for the bid itself, but it's a measurement criteria. top KPI for a bid manager is having zero bid qualification, says Jay, and completely agree with that. I think that's a hygiene factor for any bid manager, that no bid gets rejected based upon uh, lack of documentation that has been submitted. All right. Couple of comments around what Sonal and Jyotish have mentioned. Uh, Amar says, key lagging indicators. Can we turn those around as key indicators as well? Right. So that's a good one. Right. So for example, customer contacts is a lagging indicator that we have seen. How do we turn it around? Because that depends upon the client engagement that is there. This is just an example of the number of contacts, right? But turning around lagging indicators into leading, I think it's a tough one, Amar. I don't know if I would have a direct answer to that, being honest with you. I would rather respect the indicators for what they are and the kind of insights that they provide. If the question is being more proactive and trying to derive more insights, knowledge in order to influence or move up the win rates, I think yes, that is a possibility. Definitely, for example, the kind of feedback during the process itself that has come in from engaging with the client, how can that be fed back to the team itself for any kind of change in strategy or solution? That is the way that I would really look upon it. Right. How do you evaluate on quality of the pipeline of upcoming deals, says Doug. Doug, that's an interesting question. The quality of the pipeline itself. As I mentioned, it depends upon the deal qualification. As we go through the entire qualification or the sales lifecycle management process itself, there are bids, there are qualified deals, right? And so on and so forth within the CRM itself, Salesforce being a classic example of that. That being said, the quality of the pipeline really depends upon the deal qualification matrix, right? So I have looked at, worked upon, developed complex qualification matrices in themselves, right? And some of these, if answered honestly, right, really can give you a good answer of or really indicate a better quality of the pipeline itself. I think what we don't need to lose sight of is that bid management is, after all, a downstream process in the sales life cycle, where the salesperson, the business development person, is really responsible for what really enters the pipeline. The bid or the proposal manager can really contribute, provide inputs, but after all, it is the sales manager's responsibility to a great extent. Rupesh, I don't know if we have more time. I think we are at 6:27, but I would like to take one question from one of my dear friends, Tawfiq, who says, would you like to see a greater emphasis on science on the response quality KPI, or is it adequately addressed as a common practice? So I'll need to double click on that, though that's not the term I really like. But if by science, Tawfiq, do you mean some kind of a math behind it, or do you mean there are AI-based bid management solutions also which are out there, which are coming up, which really provide indicators on where the higher win rates really lie? So perhaps I would have a discussion on that with you before I hand it over to, and then I'll hand it over to Rupesh. Rupesh?
Thank you, Ashish. I think we still have much more questions to answer, and it will take another 1 hour. Understand?
Sure, I've been always speaking with Abhijit that there would always be a part two of this because, as I mentioned, this is more of a discussion, because all the people coming into this particular forum have experiences around KPIs in the bid and proposal management. So it's not that this is something very new to them. So everybody is bringing their own experience, is able to articulate their pain points as well. So it's always a great discussion to have.
Yeah. So Abhijit, I mean, if you want, I mean, we can extend for 30 minutes more, or else, I mean, we can plan for a second webinar. That's up to you.
I think we can extend. Obviously, it depends on Ashish. If Ashish is comfortable, I have no issues on extending it, because I think the interaction is quite intensive, and let us not lose the tempo.
Sure. So we'll go ahead, Abhijit. Perhaps we'll take a status call around 10 or 15 minutes from now, and see what the situation is, and then accordingly take it forward.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you so much.
Most welcome. Wonderful. Right. So going back, so Tawfiq, I think I'll be having to answer a question here itself, but I'll perhaps need an elaboration. I don't know if you mentioned that science or empirical approach, otherwise to assessing quality. Okay, I'll get to that now since it's a little bit down. Dirk says, and Dirk, okay, Jay says bid probability assessment would be the main reason for it. Every organization sets an internal benchmark on bid probability assessment. Companies like Accenture will not bid if they do not have 40 or 50%. That's what you mentioned. It depends upon organization to organization. So Jay, well mentioned. Also, it depends upon the input that goes into the probability assessment, right? That input or the weightage attached to different criteria within the probability assessment matrix will really lead to the cutoff percentages. Obviously, that would vary from organization to organization as well. Okay, Sonal says the bid value available in CRM, win probability available in CRM, and risk assessment are some of the criteria for quality deals for qualifying bids to put resources on. However, maintaining quality of CRM pipeline is the responsibility of the sales team. I think that's right. Just mentioned that a couple of minutes back, so pretty much aligned to that. Once again, just one point: the win probability in CRM is based upon the deal stage also, right? So if somebody has qualified from stage one, where there are probably 8 or 10 vendors, right down to the negotiation stage, right, the deal probability also moves from the 10% to the 80-90% itself, right? But that doesn't necessarily incorporate for the uh, uh, bid or the win rate or the qualification itself, if you get what I mean, right? The bid is a part of the entire deal and not the deal itself, right? Swati says, previously worked for smart city projects like Pan India. We faced issues like bids getting scrapped and delayed for years as well. So a bid manager, what actions need to be taken to avoid bid getting scrapped and completed? Swati, I think this one is beyond my control or anybody's control as well. I believe that smart city projects pan India are usually the government tenders in itself. I could just give you a generalized input of what are the kind of solutions that one may have for them, especially on the enterprise part of the world. Wouldn't be able to comment upon the government part of the world. So it's the entire bid qualification itself. I think the main thing to look for, which you can draw a parallel, Swati, to the smart city or the government projects, is around budgets, and whether the client, in this case any particular government, has a budget allocated for that particular project, and are they under pressure to spend that budget within an allocated period of time, or that budget goes away, right? So these are usually some of these are publicly available information, especially nowadays with more e-tendering happening for government projects. And one can also look at some of the budgetary allocations by the city or the state governments or the central governments towards some of these projects, if those budgets have been allocated, then yes, there is a lower probability of those deals getting scrapped. Right? Obviously, it's not the responsibility of the individual bid manager, right? And I don't believe of anybody in the organization, right? Amar says, thanks, Ashish. It is about being proactive areas of improvement. So that's what we discussed as well. Jay says there's no point waiting for a bid response beyond 6 months other than checkups from time to time from sales folks to understand the real reason for the obstacle. Okay. Uh, all right. Tawfiq says science or empirical approach otherwise to assessing quality of the bid itself. Um, Tawfiq, I honestly wouldn't have a good answer to that, right? Of how do we really check for the quality of the bids itself. But the one thing that I've seen is being part of uh, proposal as well as delivery assurance committees, right? So this is usually done for larger bids in larger organizations uh, for bids which are above a certain value. And what really happens in those, there is a multi-party committee which sits out there and assesses the bid manager's presentation. Right, the bid manager has to provide a presentation to these to the different team members of how the bid would be executed if at all the bid has been won. So that leads to something which is called as delivery assurance itself. Then the other thing is the bid or the proposal assurance committee as well. And this has different team members than the delivery assurance committee. The bid assurance committee may have somebody, for example, the sales people and senior executives, while the delivery assurance committee may have more people from the product or the delivery side itself. And once again, the bid manager from the bid assurance or the proposal assurance committee has to make that proposal in order to convince them that this is the right solution that is going forward to. This definitely does influence the quality of the proposal itself. Overall, I do believe that is what you were looking for. But apart from that, there are some AI tools that are being made available for the bid management itself, which really provide greater insights into the bid. Okay, Jay has replied when there are government bids, political and lobbying issues are there. Um, Chandrasekhar says one question regarding win ratio as a KPI for a bid manager. Should technical shortlisting be the KPI for the bid manager rather than win ratio? As commercial negotiation and competition are beyond the control of the bid manager. True, Jay, and it's just not the technical shortlisting. Okay, I get your point. Okay, the technical shortlisting of moving on to the next stage, right? Honestly speaking, if it's just the bid management part of it, right, then yes, technical shortlisting should be the KPI itself. But when it comes to somebody in the and that's where the thin line of differentiation between bid and proposal manager versus what the pre-sales teams really do, right? The pre-sales teams really ensure that the entire deal is taken to its eventual completion till the SOW stage itself. And that is what really it's a bid manager from a pre-sales manager. So get your point, Chandrasekhar. Acknowledge that. And all right, just let me scroll down a bit more. All right. Jay says you could, but then every organization behaves differently. Um, at Antworks, do you undertake blind bids? I would beg to differ and not really answer that specific question, Jay. Apologies for that. Wouldn't like to get specific about what Antworks does. What are the AI tools made for bid managers? Honestly speaking, Bidarshi Sahab, uh, I don't have a good answer to that, but there are tools out there uh, which really look at a few aspects of all these different parameters that we have just mentioned. For example, some of these directive indicators for that how have we performed in the recent past, for example, and you could break it down by geography, you could break it down by industry, you could break it down by the size of the bid itself. You could have additional data around that. For example, with regards to the competition, have you faced X competition in one bid and lost there, faced the same competition in another bid, lost there, then obviously the probability of you losing to the same competition in a third bid would be higher as well. Right. So what the AI tools really do is accumulate all these inputs. And once again, what really counts is the quality of the input or the data that is provided to these AI tools, right? Because we have to do a lot of Q and A's for a particular bid, as I just mentioned, around industry, around geography, around competition, size of bid, around the solution that you have, the fitment of that particular solution. And once again, it's a on in the background, it's a weighted score that I believe is calculated, and the bid qualification is really done. Right. Um, oh, all right. Then Agilent says, could you explain this topic? Oh, yes. High level discussion on career pathing and appraisals for bid managers. Right. Point noted. I think we just got carried away with answering all those questions and forgot to concentrate upon the third point, which was there as part of an outcome of this particular session. So thanks for bringing that up, Agilan. So high level discussion on appraisal and career planning. So once again, since yes, we are already 11 minutes over time, but the few points that I would like to say for proposal and bid management function itself, right? Especially during the appraisals, make the discussion as quantitative as possible. All right. Nothing else scores rather than, for example, quantifying the win rates, quantifying the capture rates, quantifying the total number of dollars that have been won. Right. These are all on the quantitative or the financial indicators that we have discussed. On the qualitative part as well, try and make it measurable as far as possible, in the sense, do uh, provide inputs of any kind of scoring that is provided by the clients, any kind of inputs like white papers, case studies, etc., that you have enabled to publish, right? So I would rather go with a small number of KPIs, like 4 to a maximum of 5, out of which 2 to 3 of these would concentrate upon being quantitative and financial in nature, right? And a couple of those would be qualitative in nature. Uh, See things like timeliness of response, etc. I think those are hygiene factors for any bid manager, and may not really be counted as one of the top 3 or 4, because if a bid manager is really not doing that particular function, then that's really a cause of concern itself. So it goes back to the fact that you really need to have a discussion with your manager at the onset of the year itself, and I think that really influences the entire appraisal. As I mentioned, all the goals that I'm sorry, all the uh, KPIs that we mentioned should be smart in nature, which is, I had a slide on that, in fact, which are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound, right? So as long as you stick to that, it would really help you provide good inputs in your appraisal discussions. Career pathing, I don't know if you have enough time for career pathing. Perhaps my bad itself. We tried to cram too much into available 1 hour of a discussion itself, but would be glad to take up any of those questions that keep on coming in the chat window. You could include some around career pathing as well. The bid manager or the proposal manager are really placed at a very interesting position within the organization itself, right? The bid and proposal management team really have insights into different parts of the organization. So one is the obvious part of it, that one gets to move vertically up, right? In the sense that one becomes a bid manager, a senior one, then becomes a team leader, team management as well, right? And handling a larger number of bids and larger value of bids, right? That is how generally growth is looked at or perceived to be. The other one could be a couple of lateral and obviously upward movements as well within a particular organization. So let's say for example, my uh, personal career journey, I have also started off as a pre-sales individual contributor, and then had moved into sales, right? So and then have moved into consulting and back into pre-sales as well. So you could look upon sales as being one of the uh, career paths for a bid or proposal management individual as well. What is important for sales is to know what you are carrying as offerings to your customers, apart from obviously being good at the very sales function itself, but it's important to know what is the product or the service portfolio that one is really carrying. And I believe that a bid or uh, proposal management person is best suited to understand that and position that in front of the clients itself. Then the other parts could be one definitely around sales enablement, right? Sales enablement is a much ignored function in many smaller organizations, but is a significant function of importance for larger organizations which are out there, which really try to upsell and cross sell within the client accounts, right? So sales enablement is definitely one of the career paths that one could take. And the other one that I've seen is that bid and proposal managers have become pre-sales solution architects, right? To give you an example, if somebody has been a proposal or a pre-sales manager on a particular kind of bid, and I've seen this both in the technology spectrum as well as the industry or the domain spectrum as well, where either somebody has become a subject matter expert, for example, uh, bidding in the retail domain and has become a retail subject SME, and has started to work as a domain expert and even has got into consulting. I have a couple of friends who've done that. Or from a technology perspective, if excuse me, if somebody is getting into a specialized deal cycle, for example, whether it's cloud or information security, right, and one becomes an expert on that particular path as well, right? So those were the couple of inputs that I had towards appraisals and career pathing. Thanks, Agilan, for bringing that up. Chandrasekhar mentions RFPIO, which is true, right? There is Vivan as well, right? I think it's a particularly good tool that I have seen as well. Please share some examples of input and directional indicators that can be used as actionable indicators or need to be scrapped. Amar, I think we spent a significant amount of time talking around the directional indicators as well, and input indicators. I think it's not one of the indicators itself. Okay, sorry. From an input perspective, it's what kind of resources are really available. I think we discussed that as well, which ties back into the efficiency, both time as well as resources. Right. What are the some things that you look for to hire in a bid manager? That comes in from Jay, and I think that's pretty much one of the last questions we might be taking up. I think the velocity of the questions has died down a bit. Jay, a couple of things, right? And then I'll give the obvious answer, which is it depends, right? But before I get to that, one is that it depends upon the level at which I am really trying to hire a bid manager for, right? Is it at a certainly junior level, let's say from a 2 to 5 year experience, or is it more of an experience from a 5 to 10 year kind of a thing, right? If you look at it from this perspective, that whether a bid manager is an individual contributor or is proposed to be a team manager. So those are the basic things that one would definitely look for, right? Those are the hygiene factors, right? Next, when it comes to it, is the relevancy of that particular person, right? Obviously, it varies whether it's a lesser experienced person versus a more experienced person. For a more experienced person, we would look at a direct relevance to that particular job description that we are looking for. So, for example, as I was just mentioning a couple of minutes back, uh, is retail as an example, right? So if I am hiring for retail, a bid manager for the retail domain itself, right? I definitely would look at someone who has previously worked in that particular industry or that particular domain. I may or may not look at individuals who come in from different domains, let's say from telecom or manufacturing, right? But that could be okay with me if I'm looking for somebody with a 2 to 5 year experience, right? So the relevancy also depends upon the experience that is there for that particular role itself, right? And then it depends upon, well, since we are talking about IT, it definitely depends upon if a person has worked upon that particular technology or not. But last but not the least, I think it's only those individuals who really want to do bid or proposal management. What I really look around for, I don't mind uh, potential candidates coming up to me and asking for career pathing, but if they are joining in order to change their career paths itself, then I definitely have a red flag or a question mark upon their eligibility, because bid management and proposal management is not there for everybody, and anybody who is really passionate about it and wants to pursue it, it comes across in those discussions itself, right? So it's job relevancy versus the passion that comes out. Right. I think that really is close to the end of the questions. Thanks, Sampada, for the kind remarks. Right. And I'll hand it back to Abhijit, who I see has come onto the stage.
Thank you, Ashish. I think this was one of the most intense webinars we ever had.
All right. Wonderful to hear. Thank
And,
you.
and thank you, participants, for all your great questions. And that's also a indicator of the ambiguity that exists
Correct.
in the entire continuum of bid and proposal management. APMP provides a framework around and a vast knowledge around the APMP body of knowledge. So please do refer to the APMP body of knowledge and the APMP resources available on the APMP site. And those who are not yet members of APMP, please do join APMP so that all this ambiguity and all these questions you have are answered by a larger pool of experts like Ashish over here. So thank you, Ashish, once again. And it was wonderful session. And thank you, participants. And we look forward for your participation in the next webinar, which I promise is going to be another engaging session. So with that, stay safe, stay well. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Abhijit, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.